This podcast is powered by Podcast Network Asia. For more info on the shows and the network, visit www.podcastnetwork.asia and Podmetrics, the only analytics you'll ever need for your podcast. Sign up now for free at podmetrics.co. Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to the Asia Tech Podcast. Did you hear my voice change, by the way, for that? Today, I'm joined by Luke Watson. I didn't even ask you how you wanted to be introduced, but I'm going to say the CEO and co-founder at HomeLive and the managing director at Home Digital as well, because I think it's kind of relevant, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah.
So how are you doing, man?
I'm great. I'm really well. Truth be told, I'm recovering from my whole family being crook for the last week, so I apologize in advance for the croaky throat, but I don't know, maybe it makes me sound a little more mysterious, we'll say.
I like how you said croaked. I had no idea what that meant, but now I get it, actually.
Croaky? Yeah.
Croaky. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background just so people can understand where we're coming from for context? And then I want to jump into like Australia, full throttle.
Sure thing. Yeah, okay. So I've been sort of technology obsessed as far back as I can remember. I think I got paid to build a website back in 1996, and that was kind of where it started.
Wow.
Had a business in high school, teaching mums how to use email and stuff like that. Joined my first mobile startup in 2000, where our sort of breakthrough product offering was sending SMSs from one network to another, because you couldn't do that back then. So I went to uni here in Australia in true entrepreneurial style. A startup I was involved in partway through uni, we raised a bunch of money from a venture fund in Silicon Valley. So I was faced with that super not difficult decision of dropping out of uni or moving to Silicon Valley. So
tough choice.
Yeah. So I lived over there for a bunch of years. Ultimately decided to move back to Australia, mostly just for sort of personal reasons, being close to my family and friends and stuff.
Can I ask you this, though? When you dropped out of university, this is something that's always really interesting to me, right? In other words, people talk about Bill Gates dropping out of Harvard and Mark Zuckerberg dropping out of Harvard, and it's all, everybody fantasizes about this, right? But these were kids from very, very wealthy families. In other words, they had no downside. If they dropped out and it didn't work out, they just got to go back to Harvard, right? But I'm just curious, when you did it.
Do you want to know, are my parents billionaires?
No, I don't care really if they're billionaires or not. But I always wonder, because when you're in university, you're young, right? And your parents are, twice your age or maybe a little bit more. Were they just accepting of it? Did they just say like, Luke, no problem. Yeah, we get it. Just go to Silicon Valley. Because normally parents want you to have that degree, right?
Yeah, so there's a couple of factors at play there. So one is that I had worked as a professional software developer for a couple of years already. And so I demonstrated my ability in the job market. And I really only went to uni because I felt like I'd missed that as a formative experience,
Yep.
And then the second thing is that both my parents have always built and run their own companies. And so it's very much sort of in the family DNA that it's like, get an idea rather than get a job type thing. So it was like, well, look, the opportunity is presenting itself. What is your objective of uni anyway? Well, it would be to go and start a company and then, whatever. So like it's happening.
Right.
So what do you want to do?
Right.
And ultimately they didn't push me one way or the other, but it was pretty clear what I was going to do.
And how did that go?
That company?
Yeah.
Yeah, it went well for a while. We took over YouTube's old office in San Mateo, which was a pretty cool experience. So they'd just been acquired by Google. And anything over $1 billion exit at that stage was still just like unbelievably like unheard of, Yeah. Nowadays, it seems like people just raise billions of dollars like it's no big deal. So anyway, yeah, so that was an amazing experience. The company did well. We were a social media platform at the same time as like Twitter was literally a little startup around the corner from my apartment. So we were all working on like, how do you sort of take the social graph and move it online, and what do social interactions mean online, and how do you build all that stuff? It's stuff that today is fairly self-evident, but at the time we were still trying to figure a lot of it out. So yeah, we did well for a while, and then this is a long story that requires alcohol to really go into it too much detail. But yeah, so short version is the GFC hit. There were some team changes that took place. Like it just sort of, a lot of companies got wiped out at that stage, and we were amongst them.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're seeing the same thing happen now with COVID, right? I know plenty of people, and there was one guy who was running a company in Australia called Journey, and I think COVID wiped them out as well. Just this stuff just
Yeah.
happens. The externalities, right? Obviously, by definition,
You took the word out of my mouth. It's externalities.
it can't be controlled, right?
Yeah, and I think they can't be controlled, but it's certainly something. You asked about me talking about Home Digital. We had some pretty high highs and low lows with that company, and we really built that to fund the research and development into HomeLive, and so we invested most of the startup capital into HomeLive, and there's just good old fashioned financial discipline. Like some advice I got from an advisor years and years ago was like, you're not a startup founder, whatever. You're a CEO of an early stage company.
Yep.
Act like it. It's like that's bloody good advice.
It's super good advice. And actually, there's a part of me that's starting to get really tired of the lack of sort of financial discipline inside the startup world. And there's a part of me also that thinks that people should go through some kind of course or some kind of class. In other words, I like to ask people, how did you figure out what financial discipline was? Right? If your parents were really good at it, you probably ended up being pretty good at it. Or if you saw somebody around you go bankrupt, you probably thought, wait a second, how do I make sure that doesn't happen to me? But finances can be complex, right? That's why there are CFOs. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so look, I've made tons and tons of mistakes along the way. So it's sort of learning by, I often say, what would a smarter version of Luke be doing in this circumstance, and try and, mimic that guy. But for me personally, I would say a lot of it came from, like startups almost by definition are not profitable or not break even, right? And so you're in this negative cash flow position week on week.
Yeah.
I always think in terms of weekly cash flow. I think monthly is just too low resolution. But so running a digital product development studio, which is what Home Digital was, where it is a profitable company and it is like hours worked by that person generates this free cash flow, and what are you going to do to invest in growth and hiring and all of that sort of stuff. Like that for me was, that's 20 plus years into my career already, but that has been an absolutely fantastic opportunity to sort of, refine the financial discipline, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, God, I think they should teach this in school. I really do. I think in high school there should be some kind of class on like what is financial discipline, what are your finances, what's compound interest, what is savings, just all this kind of stuff. Because it's not straightforward. I mean, it is once you know it, but it's not obvious just in the world. It's not like breathing, right?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think about some of the stuff I learned at high school. I'm like, that's not been useful. But balancing your accounts would have really come in handy, especially in my mid-20s when all I wanted to do was like, chase girls and hang out in bars and party and all that stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was having this conversation last night with a friend of mine, and we really just said your 30s and 40s will be way better if your 20s had more financial discipline in them, and just nobody ever teaches you this. But I think it's a metaphor for what happens in the startup world, because a lot of these guys and gals that start these companies don't know what financial discipline is. It's not like they're purposely spending money like drunk sailors. It's just that they don't know. And you're right. Yeah. You're right, because they see people raising $1 billion and they think, I mean, maybe I can raise $1 billion. And if I do, and I think you're also right about this, the week to week is more important than the month to month, because it's just harder to have that visibility. But if, Uber can raise $1 billion, why can't I? And if I can raise $1 billion, why do I care about what I'm spending, kind of thing?
Yeah, totally. It's especially that last bit. So like, in HomeLive, we worked our butts off to take a startup digital agency and invest $1 million into our startup in the course of a couple of years, right? So that takes a lot of hard graft. You can be certain that we spend capital in HomeLive like it's our own, because it's just in the fabric of the business. So when we brought in some investors on board, I think in part, there's the future opportunity and so on, but there's also the fact that they're looking at a team where they're like, okay, well, you've built this company off your own backs. Right. You've had to kind of do the work twice. Like you had to do the work, get the free cash flow, then invest that into this other business to then make that useful. For sure, an easier road would have been just take the profits, So you guys clearly really want to do this. Right. Yeah, and I think those, I've some, smarter person than me talks about the DNA of your company being created in the first 90 days, I think it is. And ours includes, I think, a good dose of financial discipline, which of course you can go too far that way and be become risk adverse, and you need to sort of balance that up a bit. But yeah, I feel pretty good about our mix on that.
I mean, look, life is a lot about balance. It really is.
Yoda.
But it really is though. I heard, and I don't know who said this, and I heard it a long time ago, and I don't think I understood it until like my mid-40s, but it's like nothing in excess and everything in moderation. And that just says, like you said, you can either spend way too much money or too little and be too risk averse, and somewhere in the middle is right. Take the risks, but don't over risk, and then spend the money, but don't spend too much of it. Can you talk a little bit, because you've brought it up a couple of times, and I love this idea that like Honed Digital was the source for the original capital that went into HomeLive. But let's talk about what HomeLive is so that people that are listening can understand what that business is. And I'm always curious, because you paid for it yourselves, you must have seen some kind of opportunity. Like, why did you start it as well?
Sure. So what it is, like our sort of X of Y statement, if you like, is Zoom for real estate. Zoom is a tool that's been built primarily for business applications, and it's amazing at it. I friggin' love that software. I use it all day, every day.
Sorry about Skype.
It's great. Yeah, this Skype malarkey is something totally different. All the mic problems we had before we dialed in. Yeah, so Zoom, Skype, Google Hangouts, whatever, they're primarily designed for business applications, and they do a really, really good job at it. Facebook Live is primarily built around sort of entertainment, social kind of applications. It's really good at that. We're a purpose-built live streaming solution for real estate. So typical, like, next question would be, what does that mean? Like, what's the difference? There are loads of differences, but just to give you a couple of examples, the way that your viewers interact with you and indeed with each other in a open property inspection type experience is really different than if you're watching a concert together.
Okay.
So, for example, a real estate agent hosting a live stream probably doesn't want the various viewers to be aware of each other or the questions that they're asking and things like that. The CRM integration, so we integrate with all of the real estate CRMs, so there's no double handling of property data or lead capture or anything like that. It's all just automated, and that's a massive time saving for real estate agents, and in fact for home buyers and renters as well. And then I guess one of the other sort of key elements of it is that because our platform understands the concept of a property and a live stream attached to that property, we have a thing called smart embedding, which allows us to inject our live streams onto the corresponding property listing page of a real estate office or a real estate portal or third-party sites. So the idea with that is, if you want to take the real estate office or a real estate group, you know, they are trying to drive traffic to their websites. And so if you can say, we run live streams of our properties, you know, here's the live stream schedule, 2:00 on Tuesday, we're doing a live stream of this property, click here to pre-register. At showtime, you can come back to that website, attend the stream, indicate your interest in the property. Like, the whole experience happens on their site. And I guess the pitch, if you like, is very similar for a real estate portal, where, you know, some people think that the battleground for real estate portals is other real estate portals. It's not. It's Facebook. That's the threat for real estate portals. Okay. And they currently see traffic seeping off their portal by agents saying, you've learned about the property, now come and watch a live stream on Facebook Live, right? So what we say is, well, we'll be the infrastructure for you to actually run those live streams on your portal yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about the implications of this, because one of the things you said was actually, I mean, a lot of it's actually interesting, but you said the interaction between different people that are watching the live stream, doesn't want to be obvious to each one of the individual users, right? In other words, if I want to say, when was the bathroom renovated? And I really want to ask that question, do I ask it when the live stream is going on? And if I do, and the agent answers, right, because I presume that the agent is the one driving the live stream, right? And if I do they answer to everybody, or do they answer just to me?
They answer to everyone. So we see that there's generally two categories of questions that get asked during a live stream. So one is what we call a steering question. So it's like, hey, can you go back out to the balcony? That kind of thing. Generally, agents will have a flow that they want to do through the property. So they stand out the front, they do their intro to camera, they flick to the rear camera on their phone, and they start walking through, and they narrate the features of the property as they walk through it.
Right.
they can see questions coming in from people along the way. And so, but it's really important that they can still retain control of that presentation. So they can stop and say, hey, a few of you are asking about the balcony or whatever. Let me continue my walkthrough, and then I'll take you out there and we can listen to the sounds of the birds, and I can cover any more questions you might have. The second category of question, and that really wouldn't really matter too much if everyone could see that. But other than the fact that it's just a little bit of a distraction.
Right.
The other category are the commercial questions, like, I love it, can you flick me a contract, that kind of stuff.
Right.
You don't want other people seeing that, you know. And so there's a lot of simplicity in some of the design that we've done. So rather than having like some are public, some are private and all that stuff, it's just the messages are private between each individual viewer and the agent.
Does the number of people that are watching the live stream help drive sort of a price floor, in the sense that if people are really interested in it, let's just say it's a house for sale for, $500,000, whatever it is, but there are 75 people on the live stream. If other people know that other people are interested, does it drive a bidding process at all? And is that a good thing, a bad thing? Is that desired or undesired?
So I think the best way to answer that question is to say, where in the larger context of a property transaction does live streaming live?
Yeah. Okay,
so the way we think about that is portals and other things of that stage, so local papers, signboards, etc., they all kind of fit in that top of funnel category. Mm-hmm. And what they are exceptionally good at doing is creating awareness of a property being on the market. They are the signal flare, hey, this place is for sale.
Yep.
Now, this is the kind of perverse thing about the way real estate's transacted is, historically, if you look at this as a conversion funnel, the next step in the process is who walks through the door at an inspection.
Right.
But between those two steps, you're losing 99% plus of your audience.
Because?
Right. Well, because in Australia, at least, you can see how many viewers there have been for a given property listing. So I can say that property has had 5,000 people look at it.
Okay.
And then you can go to the inspection and say, 10 people showed up for the inspection. So from a conversion funnel standpoint, It is horrendous. Any other industry, and you'd be saying, stop everything, we're just going to focus on this problem. But it's a somewhat accepted part of the conversion funnel for real estate.
Okay.
So what we do is we say, we refer to HomeLive as a remote engagement platform. Yeah. So the idea is that the threshold is lowered for you to engage with that property. It's not just see it on a portal, attend an inspection. There's this intermediate step between awareness and attendance that's engagement, and that's what we power.
Okay, because that was the next question I was going to ask you is, what is the level of engagement that it drives? And to me, everything in life, and I've learned this very late, but to me, everything in life is a conversion problem, right? If you want to, no, but it is. In high school, if you want to take some wonderful girl to the dance, you have to ask 100 of them to get 3 of them to say yes, and then you get to choose. But it's the same thing with real estate at some level. You just mentioned conversion.
Yeah.
Does that engagement through the live stream change the conversion factor for the portal? It's very complex, right? Real estate is interesting because there are multiple listings, I presume, in Australia, just like there are in the rest of the world, right? So it's not unique to any individual portal or any individual listing. So if I see it on portal A or portal B or portal C, how does the live stream drive the engagement so that when that flare goes up, people say, I want to go to the place where there's a live stream because I'm moving to Perth from Sydney, but I'm not flying all the way there just to look at houses yet. I want to watch the live stream before I get there and then whittle it down to 5 places so that when my family and I go there, it's very focused trip. Yeah.
Yeah.
But does that engagement drive the conversion?
Yeah. So that is exactly the point is that, if you're looking at, let's get a bit sort of nerdy in how we describe it. If you're looking at your attrition rate from one step to the next of a conversion funnel and you lose 99% of your total audience in the first step, then your downstream absolute numbers are going to be very small.
Yep.
Right. If I can tweak my top of funnel conversions by 1 or 2%, then that can give me 5 times more people on auction night or offers being made. So that's the kind of dynamic that we're playing with. And then there are a lot of, I mean, that's to be very sort of, I guess, clinical about the conversion side of it. But there are other elements to it around, we recently just signed a deal with Remax Australia at a corporate level. So we've just HomeLive enabled the whole group. And at an enterprise sort of corporate level, those guys are really all thinking about their brand and where does it fit. For real estate groups, their brand is a really key part of their proposition.
For sure. And
so if you give their franchisees a way that is a brand supportive, in context way of engaging with people, that's got tremendous value in and of itself.
What is this? So this is always interesting to me as well, right? So you're taking a small startup company, which you started, 4 years ago? I'm trying to remember the startup date.
Yeah, we had a long R&D cycle, but we went to market just as COVID started. So perfect. Someone's looking out for us.
Yeah, perfect. Well played. But when a startup company goes to sell, particularly in this sort of B2B space, right? You're selling, I presume, software as a service to, let's just use Remax as an example. What is that sales cycle like? In other words, when you show up and say, we have a tool that's going to sit in that interim step from the top of the funnel to the middle part of the funnel to help drive engagement down there. What is that sales cycle like? Because, just let's move to the insurance space and the insurtech space, because I have a podcast that talks about that too. And you see senior level insurance people, very traditional businesses, don't know the first thing about technology. So when someone comes in to sell to them, they're like, fuck on that. Like, I don't understand kind of thing. What is it like when you do that?
So, I'm no sales guru, okay? I just kind of do my thing, but and it seems to work sometimes. Yeah. So a really important thing for me is HomeLive in our truest sense is not a live streaming. It doesn't involve the word live streaming in it, because that is specifically sort of hanging your fate on a piece of technology. We're more about the concept of remote engagement. The most effective means of doing that right now is through live streaming. And so when we're talking about, how do you communicate the benefit to a real estate group or an individual agent?
Yeah.
It's really about let's talk about your operations and where you see potentially interested buyers falling out of your funnel,
right?
And what that represents in terms of wasted marketing spend and time on market and your ability to get the next round of listings and all of those things that really drive the operations of a real estate business. So, let's drill down into where you guys are at in terms of that, and then we can talk to you about how HomeLive can potentially assist. Because, we did a couple of fairly detailed studies recently about home buyers and renters and their interactions with properties and how they think about pre-recorded videos and real estate agents in general and all of this sort of stuff. And so we've got, really detailed figures and understanding of how the general public feels about the ability to remotely engage with real estate. And then we did another set of studies about people who have either sold a property in the last year or intend to sell in the next year.
Right.
And so I can say to an agent, for example, I know that if you take two similar agents, one of whom offers live streaming and one who doesn't, 79% of people will go with the one that offers live streaming.
Wow.
So in a market where there's an undersupply of properties, that's the data point that people really care about. If they've got lots of property on the market, then let's talk about the buyer side,
That's actually really interesting. And is that a countrywide study, a localized study?
We ran it in Australia, New Zealand, UK, and US.
Okay, you've just segued nicely for me. I want to know really nicely. And again, this is very subtle, right? You said you call it HomeLive, but you don't call it HomeLive streaming because it's the remote engagement part that's actually really important. And the technology around the remote engagement can change, right? It may not be live streaming, or it may have additional things on it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it actually comes back to something you asked before about the R&D process that we went through. So we identified the problem that I've already articulated about this atrocious conversion between awareness and attendance.
Right.
And so in our first iterations of this, trying to solve this problem, we went really deep into augmented reality and mobile-based 3D and all sorts of stuff, trying to figure out how to scratch that itch.
Right.
And ultimately, I mean, and our platform still has some really sexy 3D stuff in it, none of which you'll actually see when you interact with the product, because we couldn't find a way to really pointedly solve that problem using those technology stacks. So, but then when we came to the live streaming, then we were like, okay, this is how we're going to crack it. Yeah.
I want to back up a little bit though.
Okay.
When the purchase takes place, right? Or when the 5 people that are interested get interested, do they actually physically go and buy the property? Or are you seeing situations where people are just happy with the live stream? They've seen enough of
That's
it.
a great question. Yeah, so this is a topic that's getting a fair bit of discussion. There are differences from country to country around the legalities of this.
The legality?
Yeah, so what it boils down to is since we sort of cracked the live streaming part of it, we've had agents saying to us, oh my God, this is such a game changer, especially in property management. They're like, can we just say we're renting this property out at noon on Wednesday, tune in, if you like it, put in your application.
Right.
The problem in Australia, at least, is that if you do that, the view is that you're doing it sort of by description. So you haven't the law hasn't really considered live streaming as part of your right to inspect the property before you enter an agreement around it.
Really?
So that's where there's a bit of a grey area. So having said that, I have been speaking to an agent late last week. He was saying that they are routinely selling properties over live streams.
Wow.
Yeah. So we don't necessarily advocate for that. I mean, from a personal standpoint, I would be unlikely to buy a property without setting foot in it.
No way. I need to turn on the water in the house to see what the power's like. That's just my thing. But yeah, go ahead.
Totally agree. So we're not aiming to replace that part of the process, although there will be circumstances where that may happen. It's more that it helps facilitate the right people getting in the door of the right property.
So one of the things I've always thought about with portals, right, is that on the portal, and maybe this is more important for rentals than it is for purchases, but probably not, right? The transaction always seems to take place offline, right? So that the portal itself doesn't build its own payment system. It doesn't money in escrow. It doesn't do any of the stuff that's associated with the purchase and the sale online.
Yeah.
Is that possible? Do you think there's another place for you to insert yourself in the process, creating the marketplace as well? So you have the live stream and then you sit inside the other part way lower in the funnel that says, we'll also help you purchase since you've relied on us. And do the buyers and sellers even know that HomeLive is doing it, or is it white labeled to the extent that it just looks like Remax is doing it? Is there that thing, that says like powered by Intel or powered by HomeLive?
No, it is powered by HomeLive. So people, so we manage the whole registration and login on board. So even though it's embedded in their site, we still, because a lot of these websites don't have any concept of a user login, so we provide that.
Okay.
There's a lot to unpack in that, so you might have to repeat elements of that question.
No, I will.
To the question of are we trying to move down towards the transaction?
Yeah.
So I know this varies a lot from market to market, but auctions are really common here in Australia.
I didn't know that. Okay.
So we did explore the possibility of live streaming auctions and the ability to bid and things like that.
Right.
It actually, and in fact, since COVID, there are a handful of different companies that are offering that, and it is being used quite extensively during lockdowns and so on. It actually failed customer development for us. So when we went and spoke to a bunch of auctioneers, they're like, yeah, I don't want that. And it is important what the auctioneers think, because very much to your point about you got to get a feel for the property ultimately before you sign on the dotted line. Mm-hmm. The emotional element of an auction is really important to key into, because a good auctioneer feels that emotion in the room, and the partner giving the little nudge, come on, $5 more grand, we can do it, we're going to get it. Like they're able to read that and work with it.
Right.
And you lose a lot of that. And so I think live auctions absolutely serve a purpose. They are valuable. I think post-COVID, I do have a little bit of a concern about the longevity of that, if you were to really orient your whole business around that. Mm-hmm. Having said that, there are other things. I probably won't go into too much detail, but there are other adjacent features that we're developing that will also aid with the transaction.
So you just said something really interesting as well. You said it didn't pass customer, what was the word you used?
Customer development.
Customer development. So can I understand that you're still in the process, or maybe constantly in the process of doing research and development? And do you think that that's normal for, you know what, I'm going to stop calling it a startup, just a sort of a small business at your stage of development, that they're always doing this kind of R&D? Or do you think you're unique or slightly unique in that? Because I've spoken to hundreds of people about this, and I haven't heard this terminology been used before.
I would like to think that we're not unique. I really hope that people are speaking to their customers.
Yeah, it's more the R&D part of it, though. In other words, you seem to say like you did a lot of R&D on the virtual reality stuff. You've done all these types of things. Maybe I just haven't been asking the right questions before, but that's just interesting to me that you test, and then do a product kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's got a lot to do with the composition of our business. So John, my business partner, and I are both, like, he's one of the top CTOs in the country. He really knows his stuff. He has built massively scaled infrastructure before. Like, he knows what he's doing.
Yep.
I come at it from quite a product-centric sort of direction. So, like, let me explain the first 72 hours of HomeLive for you. Maybe that's a good way to start.
Go ahead.
We built a little augmented reality business card prototype. So the idea was that you could throw your business card on the table, pull your phone out, and it would detect your business card and then play a video in augmented reality in context of the business card.
Okay.
That was part of it was a home digital thing, and we're sort of looking at that, and it's like I wonder if the agents would find this useful. And so I literally started walking around to real estate offices in our area, just being like, hey, can I talk to any agent in here, whether they're the most junior or most senior?
Right.
Show them our little dinky prototype and, like, let's discuss.
Right.
And within no time at all, we'd binned that idea because it rated really well in terms of, like, wow factor, but there's no business model behind that. Like, obviously,
it's super cool, but what am I doing with this?
It's cool, but, like, use it once or twice, maybe show a friend because it shows how high tech you are, and then you totally forget about it. But that was really where we started to unpack a lot of the shortcomings of the way that the industry is serviced. And, when you really think about, this is the biggest transaction that most people make in the course of their lives. Yep. And the technology that supports both the industry and the consumers hasn't really moved in a meaningful way. Like, there's, and don't get me wrong, there is some super sexy, high-end 3D whiz-bang stuff. And I love it. It's great. But in terms of, like, mass consumption, like, it's getting used day in, day out.
Yeah.
It's still pretty similar to how it was 15 years ago, And so that's what started our dialogue with the industry and has continued ever since.
Yeah, I'm not convinced, actually, that anybody wants to put on, these big Oculus glasses, sit at home and do a virtual walkthrough in augmented reality of a house. And I guess you've done some of the work on that, but I'm just not convinced that anybody actually wants that.
I think the technology side of it, there's still a sort of hardware impediment with that. I think there's a platform play in there that someone's going to crack at some point that'll be worth $1 kajillion. Right. It might be us. But I think the question for us is about remote engagement. The very concept of engagement is quite a human idea, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a ton of technology out there that's trying to, I guess, sideline the real estate professional,
right,
to replace them. And so one of the things I always talk about with agents is you've got to be really selective with what technology you use, because you don't want to delegate your relationships to a piece of tech.
I agree completely.
Right. And, with the greatest respect to all of the, the great 3D stuff out there, the agent's largely not involved in that. They're involved in the generation of that content, and then it's out there, and it sort of, to some degree, replaces part of what they would be doing otherwise. Whereas our view with HomeLive is, like, it really allows the agent to shine in what they do best, which is, like, articulate the selling points of a property, build rapport with people, and sell a property.
Yeah, look, I've been banging on this for years now, particularly in my conversations with startup founders and with venture capitalists and the whole sort of ecosystem. And that is, I don't think technology is going to replace salespeople, because at the end of the day, Humans want to interact. They want some visceral feeling, some contact with other humans. We're naturally social people. But even when you and I talked about doing this, I said to you, do you want to have the video on or do you want to leave it off? A lot of people want it off. And you're like, I want it on because it feels more connected, right?
Yeah.
Now, listening to it, people will listen to the audio. That's fine, right? We're having a long conversation. But it's the same thing for sales agents. And whether it's in insurance or in pizza or in real estate, at the end of the day, like you said, if you're going to spend $500,000 on something, you want to talk to somebody and say, am I making the right purchase? Like, work with me here. Make me feel good about this. Convince me. Yeah, and technology's not going to do that. And I love this comment. Sorry. And I'll probably pirate this from you, but you don't want to delegate or relegate your sales function to a piece of tech.
Yeah.
You want to relegate to relationships.
It should be supporting what you're doing, not the other way around.
Correct. And also, I think that technology allows, and we saw this in the financial services world, it allows great salespeople to have their greatness accentuated. And the crappy salesperson is going to be exposed by the technology because they won't know how to use it to sort of create that knowledge superpower that it gives them. In other words, one of the things that tech allows you to do is organize all this data and then present it in a way that's meaningful. If you don't know how to do that, you can have the best tech in the world, but when it shows up there, whether it's in video form or text form, you're dead in the water. But a great salesperson, to me, is supposed to be disintermediated. Anyway, that's what I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the other part of that is it's not, our expectation is you're not going to have 100% of agents come on and be a super celebrity professional presenter, right? So there's a couple of things about that I think are really key to keep in mind. So also in Australia, those high production value pre-recorded videos are really commonplace. Yep. They serve a particular purpose, and some agents love doing them because they, help them get their next listing. Some people can't stand them. There's a whole mixed bag of that. Right. They're really different from the live stream. These are not meant to be like highly scripted,
Hollywood produced videos, yeah?
Yeah, there's slow motion walking and drone footage and all that stuff. It's not like that. It's really conversational. So what I always say to people is, if you're comfortable walking someone through in person, it's just the same mediated through a piece of tech, right? Yeah. The second part of it is, we have a really, significant customer success part to the company. So when you join up as an agent, we've got multiple onboarding sessions that, first of all, start with first principles. Not everyone is that fluent in the language of all this tech. So let's just talk about what live streaming is, what the lay of the land is, all of that kind of stuff. Some people skip that and go straight to the second one, but it is really handy for a lot of people. Then, getting your live streaming set up right, what sort of walkthrough should you do? How do you introduce yourself? When should you answer questions? All that kind of stuff. And then we go all the way through to pro sessions where we talk about like the tips that you'd probably figure out yourself eventually, but we just kind of shortcut that process. And the whole idea is like, even though salespeople are naturally pretty damn good at this stuff compared to the average, there's absolutely no harm in equipping them with a few extra concepts and tools to nail it. And even so much so, just the last one on that is we've even got a practice area within the platform. So you can literally just do a live stream to yourself. Right. And that's one of those, you're asking about customer development. That is a really clear example of that, where they just want to do a live stream at their desk or at home and just see how they look. Right.
I mean, you can imagine I do this all the time. I test my equipment. I test my voice. I test the recording and stuff like that. And I do it before almost every recording that I do. The other thing that I wanted to ask you as well was, you seem like a guy that's really data driven. Like I went back to all the R&D and all this kind of customer success stuff you talk about. Is there an optimal way to do a walkthrough? In other words, do you gather data when people are doing the walkthroughs about, is it the living room first? Do you go directly to the balcony? Do you give them advice on that too so that they can optimize the walkthrough? Or is that too granular?
I'll borrow a phrase from Andy, who's our head of design and user experience. Data informed is better than data driven.
Sure.
And fair so enough. In terms of how we recommend agents host a live stream, there are kind of a couple of norms that make sense. Like choose a nice setting, probably out the front of the property with a good view, nice, light and all that kind of stuff. That's where you do your intro and wrap it up. But yeah, I think being too prescriptive about that, you start to kind of tread on the skills of the agent. they know how to walk a person through the property if they were doing it in person. And we're saying, again, this is just, you should feel like it's the same thing. You're just doing it through your phone.
Yeah, I just wonder if there is an optimal way to do it, but that's just kind of the way my brain works. You mentioned earlier that when you did these surveys, that you did it in 4 or 5 different countries: Australia, New Zealand, the UK, the US. So 4 countries, yeah? Is that a hint to where you think you're going next, or are you already operating in all those countries?
Yeah, so we've got just under about 200,000 HomeLive enabled properties globally. We're operating in primarily in Australia. We have soft launched in New Zealand. We've soft launched in the UK. The problems that I'm articulating here are fairly universal.
Seems like it.
And so I think we'd be artificially constraining the business to say we're doing one country.
No, it's silly.
But I think, of course, we're resource constrained and capital constrained and everything else. And so you have to, hit a market, win the market, recapitalize, go to your next market. And, you got to choose how you do these things sequentially. But yeah, look, I would have said a year ago before COVID that in maybe 5 years from now, watching a live stream of a real estate inspection will be a totally ubiquitous thing, right? COVID has just moved that time frame forward. So I think probably in a year or so from now, most of the time, if you want to view a live stream, you can request one if there isn't one already scheduled. So our play is to become like that ubiquitous infrastructure that drives that globally.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point. We had a session with somebody else yesterday about a different topic, but the idea was that COVID is not bringing new ideas to people. It's just accelerating the ideas that are already there. And really, like I said, just accelerating, making them move super faster. And this remote engagement is a really important thing. And I guess I wonder, as I'm listening to this, I'm trying to think, where else would this tech be useful? You must think about that, no?
Yeah, well, yeah, I do. And I'm absolutely happy to explore this. But what I say to people generally when they ask me that question is, we're not a solution going looking for a problem.
No, not at all.
We know our target audience.
Yeah, I didn't mean that at all. But again, it's just the way my brain works, right? I see something that seems really interesting and really cool and really powerful, particularly because I said to you earlier, life is about life is just one big conversion problem. So if that remote engagement helps change that conversion mathematics, then it must be useful somewhere else, regardless of whether you're a solution in search of a problem. You're not. You saw a problem. You solved it with this remote engagement problem. Remote engagement solution. And you may not ever want to get into other businesses that do this, but I was just curious if you'd thought about where it might be useful just based on some R&D stuff that you've used.
Oh, for sure. And I think there's kind of the obvious adjacencies, right? So we're very focused on residential sale and rental. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it makes sense in a commercial setting as well.
Yeah, warehouses.
Right? Commercial real estate. But having said that, if you really sort of peel back the layers of this and you really want to get into the specifics,
I do.
Those two processes are really different. So the purchase of residential property is somewhat more driven by the sequence of steps you go through about understanding what your budget is, finding the property, going through the paperwork, et cetera, is different than buying commercial real estate that tends to start in a spreadsheet and finish with an inspection of the asset.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right. So at a superficial level, yeah, you just go, well, we can just plug live streaming into that process. But I think if you really want to nail it and make the people using that platform feel like it was designed just for them, there's more nuance in that we haven't really delved into in too much detail yet. We kind of broadly understand it, but yeah, I mean, we're super focused on residential sale and rental for now.
Yeah, sorry.
And I mean, you can build a massive company out of just residential sale and rental at a global scale. So I think that'll probably keep us busy for a little while.
Yeah, I didn't intend to imply the fact that wasn't a big enough market. And you're completely right, actually. The commercial real estate experience is very different, but also the audience is completely different. And the size of that audience is different. There may be 3 people looking at a particular warehouse and 300 people looking at any particular house, right? And the sales process for that is just very, very different. If I need a warehouse, I know where I want it located. I'm not choosing to live in this neighborhood or that neighborhood. I know where I'm delivering things. So I know exactly where I want my warehouse to be. So yeah, different experience completely.
Yeah, and you care less about the interior design of it. You just want to know, does it meet, like, as I say, it starts in the spreadsheet. Like, does it meet these hard criteria?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, it's a contender.
So can we back up way to the beginning of this, right? You said kind of offhandedly, like, I've always been interested in technology and in applying technology to solve problems. Like, where do you think that comes from? I know where it comes from for me. Like, I have a very specific moment in my life, which I'll share with you. When I was in college, because I'm older than you, I needed to write 15, 20, 35-page papers. And I was poor, right? So I had to borrow somebody's typewriter before we had a computer center at work. And typing was hard because if you mucked up in the middle of a page, you kind of had to take that page away. Sure, you could white it out. And I think it was in my junior year, I saw some dude walking around with a Macintosh, which must have been like a 2SE, just like carrying it around this beige thing. And I'm like, what?
That's so good.
What is that thing? And he was like, oh, it's a computer. He literally just like brought it into my dorm room because where I went to school, we had our own dorms, and he plugged it in. And he's like, look, it's got a word processor on it. I'm like, stop. So if I just backspace, like I can just backspace and it's gone.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah. And I said, okay, now I understand how technology creates product. Like, I didn't have the words in my head, but now I knew I could literally wait until 3 o'clock in the morning to type my paper because I didn't have to suffer with this.
Yeah.
And so for the rest of my life, and the thing that actually made me not famous, but that made me useful at Morgan Stanley and at Goldman Sachs was the way I looked at how technology could create productivity and then have that drop to the bottom line. So I know exactly when I figured this out. And actually, as a senior in college, I volunteered to work in the computer center. I didn't volunteer, but I got a job in the computer center, which was essentially just a bunch of word processing machines connected to a dot matrix printer. He says, ironically.
I still have that sound of this.
So do I.
Yeah.
Going back with no
We're really
sound.
aging ourselves here, by the way.
It's okay. I'm older than you are. But the point is, I know where it came from for me.
Yeah.
And that it actually superpowered me in a way. What was it for you, if you remember?
Yeah. So I would say there's no defining moment, but as far back as I remember, it was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it was, I want to be an inventor.
Yeah, fair enough.
Always. And like, I actually have a glimpse of a memory. I would have been maybe like 4 or 5 years old. And I actually remember my mum reading me a bedtime story. There was like how many bits there are in a byte. And so like she was going, I got to ask her about that one day. But yeah, like I was getting sort of, I don't know, programmed into this.
Brainwashed in a way, right?
Yeah, brainwashed. Yeah, so I think computers just always fascinated me. I was fortunate enough to get a Commodore 64 at a young age.
Nice.
And the other interesting sort of recollection of that was that I remember my parents had no idea how to drive it at all. And so like it was just kind of on me to figure out how to do stuff. And so, yeah, I think it's just been sort of a spirit of tinkering and, it's like a lot of the early stuff when I was a little kid that my like inventions were sort of, see problem, try and build something with sticks and electrical tape to fix problem, that kind of category of inventing. And then, computers kind of open up a different, set of possibilities when you realize that you can program them. And
do you write code as well?
Much to my business partner's chagrin, I will occasionally keep all my repos updated and stuff. These days, no, not really. Like,
don't touch that code.
It's just not an efficient use of time. And I don't want to, for a second, lead people to believe that the core functionality of HomeLive was my software work. He deserves full credit for that.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, in terms of like, as the company's grown, I don't really do any software work. I do a lot of product work.
Right.
But yeah, I got my hands dirty with a bunch of the front end dev in the early days as well.
Fair enough. I want to talk a little bit more, hopefully, about just the whole ecosystem, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I love guys and gals that have never had like a big corporate job. Right. So I suffered in a corporate life for 20 something years. I think it destroyed my soul. I say this often. And
I'm happy for you that you broke free of it, man.
So am
Look
I.
at you now.
You have no idea. Exactly. You have no idea. I think that's why I feel like I'm 25, even though I'm 55, is because I feel like I've been reborn. And, not in a religious way, but just in like a psychological way. I feel a lot better today than I did even 15 years ago. But there's something about a person who's never worked inside of a big corporate environment, right? Somebody who's always been involved in either innovating or tinkering or inventing, and whether it's with sticks and tape or with, software and hardware, in a way, it doesn't matter. But when you look around yourself between like when you first started doing this and today, what do you feel that's different out there? In other words, and I'll tell you why I'm asking. It's not just some BS question. I see a lot of changes in the 9 years that I've been in Thailand, between sort of the excitement and the energy that was around the startup ecosystem. And it feels to me like it's kind of petering out a little bit here. I'm never the person to believe that like everything that's good has already been built, because then we'd have no innovation and everything would die. But do you feel like there's a different feeling inside that startup ecosystem today? And if you do, what do you think it is? Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's riff on this idea and see if I've understood the question. But I think maybe the best answer is by analogy. So I used to be a competitive snowboarder. I did a lot of racing, and when I started snowboarding in Australia, many people don't know that we even have ski slopes here, but we do.
You do.
And I love them. They're very close to my heart. But yeah, like in the early 90s, you might see one other snowboarder in the lift line. And so you would wait to get on the lift together, just so you're like, oh my God, like instant friends.
We're awesome. Yeah, kind of thing.
Yeah, look what rebels we are. And then in the mid 90s, all of a sudden snowboarding became super cool, and it was a fad. And so all of these people who are really competent skiers started snowboarding because it was cool.
Right.
And so that lasted for a couple of years, and then people were like, you know what? It's a whole skill set that I don't have. It's similar. It kind of looks vaguely similar to the thing that I am comfortable with, but when I'm actually doing it, it's really not the same.
No.
And you know what? Bugger this. I'm going to go back to skiing because I actually get more joy out of it.
Yeah.
I think there has been this sort of fetishization of being a startup entrepreneur, and it's really cool and whatever. It's a skill set. It's a discipline.
Definitely.
It's a lifelong thing that and some people really superb at making that transition back and forward between the two.
Yeah.
Some people should. I mean, in terms of self-actualization, if you want to build a startup, or if you want to build your own company, I will always encourage you to do it. I'm a total enabler in that respect. But yeah, it's the lack of certainty and lack of adequate information at any given moment is not for everyone. Some people like a lot more structure.
Yeah.
So I think there has been this period where it's like everyone wants to run a startup. Yeah. I do think that's petering out a bit because people are realizing that it's like, to do this well, most people will take many years of, hard fought lessons and mistakes and all that kind of stuff. I guess sort of new paragraph. The other element of it is I think that the industry, that the scene or industry or whatever is gradually maturing as well. I think it still has a long way to go, but I think it's significantly better. Like before I moved to the States, there was no startup scene per se.
Right.
When I came back, I asked a buddy of mine to sort of plug me in with a few people who were doing interesting stuff. And, he introduced me to a company called Pollenizer that sadly isn't around anymore, but shout out to Mick and Phil.
Phil Morley.
Those guys were amazing. And they really kind of formed
they did.
A point of gravity around which the whole ecosystem could start to kind of coalesce.
Yeah.
And I think even though Pollenizer's not really around anymore, that set in motion something that has continued to an extent.
Those guys were pioneers for sure. Yeah.
Massively. Yeah. Massively. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And but I want to make sure that I'm not operating in a vacuum, and that when I see that or when I have that feeling, that it's actually true. And I think you're right with this idea of, first of all, the analogy was great. I'm neither a good skier nor a good snowboarder, but I get the analogy. And I like to make analogies to make points as well, because it's easier for people to understand, particularly in spaces where they don't operate. But I think I see the same thing too. Everybody was kind of rushing for the gate to get in. And then when they got in, they were like, I think I'm in the wrong place. I need to rush back out of the gate. And the people that were left were the people that were kind of meant to be there, the real innovators, the real technologists, and the real sort of I can build a business type of people. And it's better that way because, look, ask your engineer friends. And one of my engineer friends said this to me. An engineer's job at its core is to, eliminate noise and find signals. And if everybody is sitting inside that package where it's like all these startups are trying to build stuff that nobody wants, it's hard to find the signals. It's harder to find it with more noise. So I think they've eliminated their own noise. And I think that's really beneficial, actually, in a way.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I think there's a lot to be said on that point as well around the idea of an investment thesis, and they can become too narrow, where you see real genuine innovation staring you in the face and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, but it doesn't fit within this very prescriptive thing that we're doing at the moment.
Right.
The other thing is like something that really rubs me the wrong way is these people who seek to too narrowly define what it is that makes you an entrepreneur or a startup or whatever. They're usually trying to sell something, right? They make out like it's some sort of club that they get to deem you worthy for or not worthy for. If you're building a company and, you're trying to make profits for yourself, your family, your shareholders, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, who gives a stuff? You're in the club, man. Like, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's like you're not blitz scaling fast enough, or you haven't raised enough. You're like, wait a second. I don't need that necessarily to build this business. There's some kind of value judgment, right, that lets you into that club theoretically that says what you're building is not valid. Not you, but
exactly.
What one is building is not valid. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It's the idea that like you're a second tier like operator because you know where your revenue comes from. It's bullshit. So I almost want to go on a crusade to just kind of stomp that out. Like, you know what? If you're building a company, good on you. Good luck to you.
So I'm already on that crusade, actually. I really am. And I think that was what I was intimating earlier, where I'm tired of all these conversations with people that, used to build really big business that make value judgments about what one is building today, because either A, it doesn't measure up to what they built in a vacuum 15 years ago, or B, because they say it's not scalable or not fundable or not whatever. But you make this great point. Where's the profit going to come from? I look at some of the most valued businesses, particularly in Southeast Asia, that will never, ever turn a profit, but have been amazing at consuming investor dollars. We don't need to go any further than Grab or WeWork, companies that have just destroyed value, but somehow they are celebrated, whereas people that are like operating in the trenches and operating in the shadows, just building sustainable businesses, somehow are not allowed into that club.
Yeah, for sure. And again, so one of the things that we saw a lot of here at one stage was the kind of fast follow phenomenon, which I'm not a fan of, to be frank. And this is where I kind of contradict myself a little bit, but I'm not a fan of that kind of rocket internet style, like, oh, cool, that's working in that market. Let's just take that concept, replicate it one for one, and just pump tons of cash into it, buy the market, and then hopefully flick it to the people who actually innovated that thing in the first place.
Exactly.
I don't love that.
Hate it.
I really don't. But at the same time, I can understand why capital flows towards those, because it's a de-risking step. So, but venture funds are accountable to their investors. So, it's what it is.
But in a way, you bring up a great topic. And if you really want to go there, I'm happy to go there. But let's go back and look at a company like Lazada. Rocket Internet founded, one of the biggest e-commerce companies in Southeast Asia, raised a ton of money. The last round that they raised, one of the last rounds was a $100 million investment from Tesco. So a supermarket chain that was trying to build its own e-commerce into it, and said, as a hedge, we're going to buy into Lazada. And that investment was made at a $3 billion valuation, which, 5 or 6 years ago was a lot of money. It's actually a lot of money today. But when the whole idea of that was just ballyhooed in the press about, see how successful Lazada is. They still haven't turned a profit, by the way. When Alibaba came in and bought Lazada, I'm trying to remember the year, 2014, 2015, I can't remember. Do you remember what they paid for it? And it's a rhetorical question. It's not a quiz, right? You don't. They paid $1 billion for it.
Yeah.
So all of the de-risking that went in above $1 billion was just vaporized. And the same thing happened in WeWork, and the same thing is going to happen in Uber and Grab as well. So I get it.
Well, I think, I think the takeaway there is just because it's a fast follow doesn't mean that you cannot be overcapitalized.
Absolutely. But it also means that if you're only building a business to sell it to somebody bigger because you're trying to disintermediate them, in other words, if you're building Lazada to sell it to the Central Group or the Mall Group in Thailand, or, pick a company in Indonesia, they've gotten smarter.
Yeah.
And they're not going to pay a premium for your money-losing business when they have a physical business that's making money, and they can just buy your technology for cents on the dollar and then supercharge their own businesses in a way that you couldn't because you didn't have the right relationships, the right cost structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, look, it's a viable strategy for some to say we're just going to, find an incumbent, become dangerous enough that they feel compelled to take us out of the market.
Right.
My preferred approach is to try and create value that is, conducive to building a company that is self-sustaining.
Exactly. That's what
at scale.
Yeah, it's sustainable at scale. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, you see the stress of those companies where they're like, if we don't get acquired in the next X period of time,
right,
we've either got to raise more capital or get sold, or we explode.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, going back to like the entrepreneur's journey, like in the long term, I don't want that kind of, I don't want to wake up with that vibe every morning.
No, I was going to ask you, is it fun to work at HomeLive?
Well, you'll have to ask the team, but I love it. I think it's great. It's funny, so we moved out of our office just temporarily for some renos just at the start. Sorry, it's such an Australian term.
No, I got it.
For renovations.
I got it.
Yeah, we just can make everything short. Yeah, at the start of the year, and we were meant to move out for a few weeks, just at the request of our landlord.
Right. And
then move back in again, and then COVID hit, everything shut down. And they were eventually like, okay, well, renovations are finished. Are you ready to move back in again? I'm like, hell no.
I'm not going back there.
No way. And so, yeah, we're fully virtualized at this stage. And I think for the most part, everyone loves it. We've continued growing the team, pretty steadily since the start of the year. Like, we raised capital over Zoom. We closed, some, corporate partnership deals all over Zoom. It's all just been done in this little, I know this is an audio podcast, but in this little, spare room of my apartment. And yeah, I think for the most part, the team is happy, self-actualized, they're working from places they're comfortable in. We try and get together as often as possible, but mostly just make it a social thing.
And how big is the team?
We're still small. We're 8.
Okay, that's awesome, right? That's awesome. Do you think that this COVID thing is going to is a structural change in the way people work? I had a long conversation about this yesterday with somebody. In other words, you renovated this. First of all, I worked at Macquarie Securities for 2 years. So when they used to say stuff like, instead of presentation, prezzo. So when you said reno, it just translated in my head right away to renovation.
I can go full Australian for you and just please contract everything.
Please do. Where was I going? I can't remember. But do you think that there's a structural change in the way that work is going to take place from a meeting together standpoint? Because even you said, and this is my key, even you just said, we try to get together every now and then, but it's more just as a social event. Because I think that's really important. I don't think the office is actually super important for productivity per se, but I think it's really important to create those social connections so that you want to be productive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think it's really on, business leaders to kind of figure it out, right? So it's this is a really good catalyzing moment to kind of make a call on it. And I think companies that try and do something meaningfully different will benefit as a result of this. Mm-hmm. I talk to lots of, business owners about this. And I mean, obviously for people who need to be somewhere physically, it just is what it is, right? But for sort of information workers, I've got a few ideas I sort of toss around a bit. So one, for example, would be the workplace that you're in informs the culture. I mean, obviously the people within it are the number one determinant, but the sort of feeling of the environment that you're in does say something. You walk into an office and you feel the vibe and the culture of it the second you walk in. When you've got a team that's primarily working remote, what does the function of that office really become?
Right.
And I think it's almost like you really start to distill down. It's not so much about, okay, well, we need to have enough officers to have 5 meetings running concurrently. It's more about like, when we're in this space together, how do we feel, and what does it create in terms of team cohesion? Yeah. It's almost, sorry, this is a little bit of a detour, but it's another analogy that might be a good example is, I was speaking to a guy who used to be an advisor of mine. He was the founder of Quicksilver in Europe, this guy, Harry Hodge. And we were talking about like the direction of retail. We were speculating a decade ago about where it was going to go. And one of the things we're talking about is it becomes more and more experiential, where you go into a physical shop,
right,
not with the intention of like taking shopping bags out, but just to go and experience the brand and maybe try your clothes on and stuff. But ultimately, all the fulfillment is happening elsewhere. Maybe there's a similar thing with the workplace. You go there to just feel the company values and I don't know. It's a really open question, but I think it's a really interesting one to think about.
But I mean, companies like Nike actually tried to do that, right? When they built their own store. So you could go in there and you could shoot hoops, or you could throw a football or touch the baseballs or whatever it is, right? Kick the soccer balls and stuff. Yeah. And you went there for fun and you're like, damn, I'm going to buy, I like this. I feel good here. I'm going to buy something.
Yeah. Because I think it challenges this idea that it's automatically good to be physically lugging a bunch of stuff around and then having to find the car in the car park and stuff it in the boot. And it's actually not that good.
No, it's not. it's not. But I do believe, again, getting back to this thing we talked about with the sales and the remote experience, is that humans are fundamentally social beings, and that there's something to be said for Thursday night after work going, you want to go downstairs and get a few beers, and then we'll go home. Because I think that's where those real relationships are made. And what I said yesterday to somebody was, that's how people get promoted, right? And not in a bad way, but in a good way. It's because I love working with this lady, and she's so good at her job. Let's get her more responsibility.
Yeah.
And that happens over a beer, where you just get to know each other. Yeah. And I don't think there's any replacement for that. The same way there's no replacement for having a great salesperson interact with somebody who's trying to buy or sell something.
That's funny, is that? Yeah. That's very real topic. It's a live topic for us at the moment. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. That's what I think will be the sort of ultimately positive thing to come out of a really shitty, weird point in history with COVID, is that it does allow us to re-examine the things that we do just because that's how we've always done it.
Right.
Zoom's a good example. Like, the idea of me doing a capital raise and doing these partnership deals and everything exclusively over Zoom. I literally met one of our partners for the first time last week for a drink.
Right.
And I emailed him. I was like, crazy idea. Should we actually meet in person for a beer? And he's like, how very 2019 of you. It's like, yeah. But yeah, it's like all bets are off. How do you want to do business now? Cool. Let's try that.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. Agreed. Look, let's do this. I want to break. This has been amazing, but I've actually got another meeting soon that I have to prep for. I cannot thank you enough for doing this. And I feel like stylistically, this has been one of my favorite conversations.
Oh, awesome.
I really mean that. And I would say, and I'll say it on air as well, like, if you know anybody else that's interesting and compelling and that is willing to be open about their experiences, I'd love to have them on the show as well. But I really want to thank you for doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been really fun. Really nice to chat.